Okay, we're back with strategic planning. It's not rocket science. That's our module, and this lesson is all about the 5 phases of strategic planning. I've done the next slides graphically so you can actually see what the details are, and I know that all of you can read, so I am not going to talk about the actual specific bullet points under each. Make sure you're printing your handout. You might want to blow these up into a slightly larger graphic format, and by all means please go ahead and do that and post them so you know where you're at. Now, whenever we talk about phases, I'm always a little bit concerned that we think of the phases as discrete, that we have to finish phase 1 before we go to phase 2, before we go to phase 3. In fact, a lot of this is concurrent. It's happening at the same time, and it's kind of a flow. It will not feel as organized as it looks like on these slides, but I wanted to give you clarity. So understand when you're in the midst of it, you should come back to this and say, have we ticked all the boxes here? The other thing is that this runs amok always being a little bit generic. And so if you're doing your planning to plan at 20% at the front end, my suggestion to you is take these graphics and fill out the bulleted list. Put the stuff that's not there that's important for your organization to consider at each one of these steps. And I guarantee you each one of these arrows will end up with 10, 15, 20 things that you need to be doing. The other thing is to not be overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of all of this. I'm giving you the full meal deal version. So you can shrink this or grow it however you would like. So do what makes sense for your organization. The other part of it is the standard old and really bad joke about how do you eat an elephant, as if any of us would want to do that. The answer to that is, of course, we eat an elephant one bite at a time, like we eat every other single thing that we have on our plate. So if strategic planning is on your plate, just hunker down and eat one bite at a time. Each of these things will come together in their own time. Now, I'm going to just put a pitch in for my profession, which are consultants to the nonprofit sector. It can be really helpful if you have some money in the bank to pay a consultant to facilitate this process, because what it does is make sure that these 5 phases in the process and each of the steps within it keep having traction. One of the things I've seen when this gets managed by managers, facilitated by managers or by volunteer board members, so we tend to have a great launch and we get going in phase 1 and we're doing pretty well, and then something happens, a board member gets sick or somebody gets pregnant or somebody has, you know, a life event that, you know, slows them down in some way, or work just goes poof and we end up at year end or funding cycle, grant making cycles, any of those things, and everything comes in and strategic planning gets backburnered. So when you have somebody who's a consultant to facilitate this process, and assume that they have expertise in this area and assume they have a good reputation, so always ask them, what have you done, and then go talk to the people in your communities that they have worked with. Make sure then that they have good quality and they're bringing good stuff to you and that they know what they are doing. Because I have a phrase, good consulting and bad consulting costs exactly the same money. You're going to pay a large amount of money every single day, and if it's bad, you still pay that money. And if it's good, you're so excited and you're going to pay that money happily. So make sure that you've got a good consultant who has a good reputation and knows what they're doing, and by all means ask them for copies of their strategic plans. Now I'll say this with great humility, is that there will always be a really good consultant. It was me when I was in my late 30s. There will always be a good consultant who's never done a strategic plan but will be a rock star for you. So don't overlook somebody who's just starting out, who's got the goods but maybe shorter on the practical end of this. You can always chunk the payments out, and so you are paying them a portion of the work as the work progresses, rather than paying them all at the end when you are not happy, or paying them, you know, at half progress, third progress, half progress, etc. So fair enough to take a chance on some people, particularly if you're working in a smaller community, but just make sure that you really have confidence in their ability. These people should not, consultants should not be high maintenance. They should earn their keep, they should be fast, they should be agile, they should get the job done for you. Okay, so that's another way of making this a little less daunting and a little less kind of challenging. So the first area is the planning to plan. You're going to decide with the board motion that you're going to plan. You're going to go through the process of creating a committee, and you could delegate the actual facilitation to your executive director or some other senior manager. And then you're going to do your plan to plan. And this is not just to sit around the table and talk about what you might do. This is an actual plan. It'll probably be 3 or 4 pages long. It'll block out the 5 phases or some version of that, and it'll say this is where we're going, and it'll make sure that there is a time frame of some sort that says we'll be done in 3 months or 4 months or 6 months or whatever you think your timeline is. Remind yourself that if you're a little over time, it does not matter. What matters is you get a good quality product and you get it finished. So if 6 months becomes 7 months, don't sweat it. Just get it done and realize that, you know, real life intervenes and stuff happens. Second phase then is information gathering. This is by and large the most complicated, and it's also the most time consuming, and arguably because your results at the other end when you actually have a plan depend on the quality of the information. This is actually one of the, if not the, most important phase, probably next to planning to plan. So what are we doing here? We're talking about who our stakeholders are, and here's a list of your stakeholders: service users, whoever is the consumer, customer of your organization, board members, past and present, employees at all levels, members of your organization if you have members, donors, funders, supporters. You can have members of the community, you can have partners from the broader service delivery that you are, your sister and brother agencies out there. So any of those guys can be your stakeholders. Longer list means more time, and it also means more energy devoted to being able to gather that. Remind yourself, you're going to do this every 3 to 5 years. So 3 years is probably about the right time frame in my opinion. 5 years, we're usually living on shifting ground, and it's really hard to predict the lay of the land going 5 years out. 3 years, we can make some pretty good guesses about some of the things that are happening in our sector. So important then that we decide on how we're going to gather that information and the information that is to be gathered. So the second arrow here is, what questions do we want to ask? Ask different questions of different stakeholders. This whole notion that we have to have 10 questions, everybody gets to ask them, all that means is 5 out of the 10 questions for half of the people are not going to be appropriate. So if you want to create a master list of 40 or 50 or 60 questions and then pull out of the list the 5 or 6 we'll ask of this group of stakeholders, the 5 or 6 we'll ask here. And it's better to ask fewer questions and let the conversation roll and have good, solid dialogue about these, whether it's in a survey with written comments or whether it's in a focus group. It's better have fewer questions with quality information than it has a whole bunch of questions with not a whole lot of information. It's the old phrase of surveying garbage in, garbage out. If you ask 25 questions, you're going to get lost in the details, and your data that comes back to you will be confusing and not particularly helpful. So find a middle ground for the number of questions. My own rule of thumb is no more than 10. But does that mean you can't ask 15? No. Does it mean you could ask 7 or 8? Yes, absolutely. So entirely okay to figure out that and ask different questions of different groups. The third part of this is identify how you're going to gather this information. Please don't just survey everybody. So create some dynamic processes here. Surveys are one way. One-on-one or one-on-two interviews is another way. Focus groups, fancy way of just saying a facilitated discussion. Document review, so what's our information that we have? By the way, don't go tons of historical stuff. Keep it pretty much present day, maybe the last 2 or 3 years if you're looking at trends. That would be fine. But don't go back to the beginning of time, when the agency was born, and try and track the trends. That's a project for a historian to write the history of the organization. It might be really interesting to do, but it's not really all that germane for the employee or for the strategic planning process. Make sure that you review the data that you do have, and if there's some gaps in that data, see what you can do to fill in those gaps. So what we want to do, for example, we want to look at emerging trends in terms of the workforce. We want to know, are we short for workers, and do we have vacancies, and are we having a hard time finding people who have the qualifications and the qualities that we want to fill the vacant positions that we have. That speaks to strategic initiatives around recruitment, ongoing training, in-house training, creating homemade skill sets that we actually build. We don't do enough of that, by the way, where we find the gaps and just simply teach to them. We keep trying to hire people that are not there. The phrase that I always use when I'm talking HR with HR folks is that we're fishing from a puddle. This is not a lake, it's not an ocean, it's a puddle. So we have significantly shrinking number of people who are able to do the work that we need them to do. That's not exclusively, that's a very broad statement. It's not true of all parts of our sector, but it's generally true of the non-for-profit sector. We want to think about, do we do a literature review? We want to think about what are some of the trends in the sector. Is the sector growing? Is it shrinking? Is it consolidating? Are we joining up with other organizations? Are we creating more partnerships? Are they working partnerships, financial partnerships, philosophical advocacy partnerships? So we want to talk about, in general, where are we going and what are some of the things that we see happening? And if there's any other research for pieces of information that you don't have but feel that would be beneficial, and I would remind yourself, don't go chasing after stuff that you're not going to need or that you're not going to find useful, because that just consumes people, money, and time, right? All right, the next one then is, the third one is summary and analysis. So we do a detailed summary that will be used as our working document, and so that's a big piece of chunk of paper, you know, 40, 50 pages long, usually, that takes all that and puts it in, all that information you've gathered, and puts it in one place. Then we do a drill down for meaning, and this is really important because 50 pages is overwhelming and there's no magic in it. What we really want to do is extract the themes, find where the kind of the subsets are, and it's very common to take your committee now and break it off into chunks. So if you have, let's just say, 5 people on your committee, for sake of argument, we take 5 areas of our summary document, the big one, and assign by topic, by area, one chunk to each one of those 5 people. So they then work either on their own or with 1 or 2 other people to mine down through the data and pull out the stuff that's meaningful. So this is really a critical stage. If you have had the good fortune to hire a consultant, your consultant will either, 1, do that for you, or secondly, will facilitate that process with your committee. And I like the facilitation part rather than doing it myself, because I'm always afraid I'm going to put my own filters on, and I might miss some stuff that if you were inside the organization you would catch. So we're looking for the bigger pictures here from the information we've gathered. And then finally we develop a user summary, which means who are the stakeholders that will actually come to the retreat, who will actually build the major components of the strategic plan, and what do they need to see. This is often then translated into a PowerPoint presentation sent out to people in advance who are going to attend the retreat, and then also usually presented by someone from the committee or your project consultant at the actual retreat, so that everybody is kind of starting at the same point in time. All right, then the next one is to hold your strategic planning retreat. So this is the 4th one on our list. We want to identify who will attend. What you're interested in is 2 or 3 people from each one of the stakeholder groups, all of the board, all of your senior management team, some of your direct service people, some people historically, if they're interested in strategic planning processes. Often funders attend, often major donors can attend. So anybody that you feel would be constructive, I would encourage you to hand pick people who are, and specifically invite them. So rather than saying, I want a representative from the Ministry of whatever, one of your major funders, actually invite someone and say, would you be with your department's representative to come to our strategic planning retreat? And I think that sounds a little bit like cherry picking, but the reality is there are some people who are lovely bureaucrats, really nice funder contacts, but they're not future thinkers. And what you want is somebody who has that future philosophy, points their nose in a direction that is going to be very helpful, and is an out loud thinker. This is a process which has really helped a along by people who are opinionated, by people who have strong perceptions and are prepared to articulate those perceptions, and who are not subscribers to groupthink, because strategic planning and groupthink are a dynamic that we don't want to have. If everybody is 100% in agreement of what our strategic goals should be, we get into trouble fairly quickly, because then we're just kind of confirming the obvious. Then the third thing is we want to agree on strategic priorities. So we're going to present our results at the gathering, and then we're going to go through the process of deciding from these major themes what are our major directions. Now, here's one of the cautions I will give you. If you're facilitating this yourself, please ensure that you make your summary short and give it to them in advance, and make your dialogue and discussion to get to agreement on strategic goals long. So this, because you usually have only a day or sometimes a day and a half, so you want your presentation of the results to be a couple of hours at most if you have a day and a half, 90 minutes if you have only a day, and the rest of it is spent doing the out loud thinking about what we need to do. All right, final one in this list then is you draft your written plan. Designate one person to write the draft. Do not try to draft in groups. Choose somebody who's a good thinker and a good writer, and give them sufficient time to take what is usually 20, 30, 40 pages of flip charts that have decorated your walls at your retreat, and then have them distill that and start wordsmithing the goals and the objectives. Make sure that you then send that document out for feedback, but make it a narrow group. Do not send it to everybody who is at the retreat. Everyone that's at the retreat, but plus all of their friends that participated, will get a copy, an electronic copy of the strategic plan when it's done. But handpick 4 or 5 or 6 people who are stakeholder representatives who will take a look at this, who have the time to do it. Give them a tight time frame so that it gets an urgency attached to it, and tell them exactly what you want. What I want when I'm consulting in this kind of process is I want them to send their comments to me directly as comments on the Word file. I want them to give me critique, but not say this isn't well worded. I want them to give me the wording that would be better. So give people a very specific direction on what you need and when you need it by. Then finally, you make your revisions to your plan based on the feedback, and it goes to the board for final approval. Don't fool yourself. Sometimes after all that, the board still has a few tweaks to make. So I never rest easy until the chairperson says the motion was carried. So that's perfectly fine. This is an important document. It has to have legs for 3 years. So really important that you get it as right as you can be. That said, it's really important that we not mess with good, and that we not spend too much time on the minutia. So, it should be basically well formatted, and the content should be good, and there should be only a few typos. But if the commas are not in the right place, or you've forgot to close the parentheses, that's fine. All right, then final step in this is actually a follow-up step. So I don't consider this so much as part of the planning process, but it is where the rubber meets the road. So this is implementation and monitoring progress. So not part of planning, but certainly part of what we have to do in order to secure the success of our strategic plan. So around each one of the major goal areas, I would encourage you to create a task force. This is another name for a committee, and their focus is on building an action plan and making things happen. One of the greatest failings of strategic planning is the goals are not strategic enough. They're semi-operational or flat out operational. So the committees, the task forces, should be a shared board management responsibility or board executive director, senior staff responsibility. So if you don't have board members on your committees, it's probably because this is not strategic. And that's a lesson to be learned for the next strategic planning process. If you look at that goal and say, we don't need a board member for this, then you probably have missed the boat in terms of making that goal truly strategic. Take it up one more level. It's probably at 5,000 feet. Take it to 10,000 feet and figure out what you need to do to make it strategic. Managers do not need more work, and board members' engagement is so critical to the success of your organization. So board member involvement, 1 or 2 people on each one of the task forces. Verbal and written reporting, if you have a board member on the task force, make sure that it is that board member who is reporting back to the board. There's a bit of a tendency to have staff do the reporting out because they often have the minutes, they've sometimes facilitated, etc. Make your board members do that, and I do mean sometimes you have to make them. And for those of you volunteering on strategic planning task forces, put your hand up and say, I won't chair the committee, but I will report back to the board on a monthly or a quarterly basis. And then do at least a quarterly annual review. I love to show this graphically. So we take all of our objectives under each one of the goals and we identify, are we green, yellow, or red? Green means we're cooking along, we're good for time, we're making progress. Yellow means we might be behind time, or we're not making progress, or maybe we've hit a few hiccups and we're a little bit behind, it's not going quite as smoothly. And red means we have not started, we may be dug in. Red might be red just simply because it's an objective that actually gets bounced forward to year 2 or year 3. So that's perfectly fine if it's red for that reason. But if it's red because you don't have the resources, or the committee has fallen apart, or whatever, you know, life happens inside our nonprofit world. So make sure that you, if it's red for a reason, that you problem solve around what to make that red. All right, the question that's often asked is how long this should take. It does depend on a whole bunch of things. How deep your information gathering goes, how many people are involved, who facilitates the process, whether it's an external person or an internal person. I pretty much guarantee you, if you find a good external person, they're worth the price of admission. But of course, I'm biased because I do some of that as part of my consulting practice. Whether or not the organization's leaders have experience with strategic planning, when second and third and fourth time you do this, everybody gets into a groove. Executive director, CEO knows what they're doing. Senior managers know what they're doing. They're able to provide right support. If you're lucky, you bring your same consultant back to facilitate, you know, second, third, fourth planning cycle along, and it goes so smoothly. You wonder how you struggled the first time out the gate. How much detail you choose to include in each goal and objective. So, you know, the bigger the goals, the more the objectives, the more work that has to be done. So that has an impact. And then finally, and this is a word of warning, how picky you get with your final drafts. In my consulting role, I work with clients that just simply say, this is great, this captures it, this is the essence of it. And, you know, 2 years later, I go back and look and I think, there's typos in here, there's stuff here that, you know, I didn't word quite the way I should, and etc. But the real point is that will not stop you from making progress. It will not stop the strategic plan from being successful. It may be not as tight and as clean, and I'm not suggesting that I deliver kind of not clean products, because I pride myself on being pretty picky. But I love a client that focuses on the content and the moving forward rather than focuses on, should there be a comma after that? Or is it biannual or semi-annual? I don't know which that is, right? So those kinds of things happen and it slows us down. So let's have a good, clean product that's quality and that we're proud to share with our funders and our stakeholders. But the other side of it is, if we pursue perfect, it's going to take us a lot longer than it should. All right, that's the end of this particular lesson, and please join me for the next lesson in this module.